The Disrupt Education vlog can be found on YouTube. To hear it in podcast form, search Disrupt Education on any of the following podcast platforms: Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Castbox, Overcast, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, Spotify, or Stitcher. Welcome to this episode of Disrupt Education. I have Blake Bowles here. He is the director and founder of Unschool Adventures, an author of many books. His latest is Why Are You Still Sending Your Kids to School? Blake, there's so much more to you. Can you welcome first off?
Thank you, Pete.
And tell us a little bit more into who you are.
Hi, I'm Blake from California, and a lot of people ask if I have like an alternative education background, but I don't. I grew up going to pretty standard California public schools, and I was a good student, and I did what good students do, and I went to the best college that you can get into, which for me was UC Berkeley. And I studied the thing that I thought was cool, and that was astrophysics. And it has the bonus of making people be like, wow, such a smart person. And that was fun for a couple years until I realized that I didn't want to do research science, and that I was actually kind of not qualified to do it. Like, I couldn't handle the advanced math. And at the same time, I was thinking maybe I'll become a high school science teacher, and that's when I stumbled into a bunch of books by former high school teachers who had quit teaching and started writing and speaking about what they saw as the fundamental flaws and issues with the conventional school system, both public and private. And that just completely captivated me. I ended up designing my own major to study alternative education theory and graduated with the least marketable degree that UC Berkeley has ever issued in alternative schooling and science education. And from there, got involved in the world of super alternative education, like homeschooling, unschooling, democratic free schools, the stuff that's pretty out there on the fringes of most people's imagination. And that's where I've been dwelling ever since, on the fringes.
I really enjoy, like when I read that you actually built your own major at UC Berkeley, that was just, tell us a little bit about how did that come about? Because I'm sure there's students I know a lot that are dropping off of the college realm. They're like, this isn't going to work. That might even be an alternative for them to try to figure out how to build. What was that build like? That's very interesting.
It wasn't easy. I had to fight for it. First of all, education majors in general are considered kind of jokes in academia. They're considered one of the most easy degrees that you can pursue. And I think that's kind of a shame because it's an extremely important subject and discipline. So there was no education major at Berkeley, and the interdisciplinary studies program came with a bunch of mandatory classes I had no interest in. And at some point in my investigation, someone tapped on my shoulder and said, have you heard of the individual major? I said, no, what's that? They said, go to this lady's office in this building. And so I found this one lady who had a filing cabinet, and that was the individual major. And apparently 7 people out of Berkeley's 20,000 undergrads were doing this. And it was a holdout from the Berkeley 60s, 70s free speech movement. And essentially, you get to choose every single class. You can get credit for doing independent study, which is what I did a lot of, and you just need 2 professors to sign off on your plan, and you have to write a senior thesis paper. I wrote a really crappy senior thesis paper, which I actually I'm glad I did that because I think it got all the bad writing out of the way, so I could do some halfway decent writing later in my 20s.
Well, that's such an amazing path, and I don't think a lot of people know. Like, there's so many intricacies that you can kind of research that really aren't out there. What do you think would have happened if that person didn't tap you on the shoulder?
That's a great question. I think about that from time to time. I think I would have gone through the master's degree in credentialing program to become a high school science teacher. And I think I would have really struggled with the rules and the standardized tests and the bureaucracy. I've ended up working for myself, and that has worked really well for me. And so I don't think that my personality would have been a good fit with the school system. So I probably would have ended up, trying to find some new career at age 25 or 30, and maybe things would have been fine.
Monday morning quarterbacking, I guess. So So then, yeah, let's talk a little bit, but let's dig into that. You mentioned, okay, with the standardized testing and those types of things, you've created something here. So I usually ask the question, what do you think should change in education? But you've created something that is a change in education. You've done a lot of studies on it. You've written books about it. Let's jump into Unschool Adventures first. What is that, and how did that evolve? What happened there?
It came out of pretty selfish interests, to be honest. When I was, 24, I had been working in outdoor education for a few years right after college. So essentially getting paid to take groups of fifth graders on hikes and doing some basic natural science instruction, running ropes courses. Usually kids were very happy to be going to outdoor education centers because it's sort of this week-long fun break from regular school. And so I was happy to work there for the same reason that I was always happy to work at summer camps. Generally, it's places where kids are enthusiastic to be there and to be participating. But I think I was essentially done working for other people. And I quit my jobs. I ran away to South America for 3 months.
Wow.
And I really fell in love with Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, how do I get back to Argentina? I have essentially no money. I need to work somehow. I have this background working in summer camps and outdoor ed, and I was actually working at a ski resort that winter, and I was applying for jobs to be a gap year program leader in South America. That was my best idea.
Yeah.
And I got denied from all the jobs I applied to, but one of them, I got close enough to the job that I had a sort of functioning relationship with the director of a gap year company. Mm-hmm. And after I got denied the position, I sent him an email and I said, hey man, could you help me start my own trip leading company? I really feel like I need to do this, and I think that I can do it for myself. Yeah. And to my unending delight, the guy said, yes, I will help you start your own company. He helped me find paperwork. He helped me find professionals to work with. Nice. And just out of the generosity of his heart, he said, we need more companies like this in the world. And so Unschool Adventures started as my personal desire to work for myself and also to go to Argentina, but also to work with this demographic of teenagers who I'd recently come in contact with, the unschoolers. And yeah. I'd read about teenage unschoolers when I was doing all my research in college, but I had just started working for a camp called Not Back to School Camp, which is still running to this day, and I've worked there over 12 seasons. And it is the place to go if you are a self-directed teenager who has opted out of school and you want to meet other cool teenagers from all over North America. And they were just a complete pleasure and delight to work with. And so I pitched the trip to that teenage unschooler community, and 9 people signed up, and all of a sudden I had a profitable business with almost zero overhead.
Nice.
And yeah, I mean, I made $4,000 the first time I ran a trip, which felt like winning the lottery to me at age 25. And slowly built the company up from there.
Mm-hmm. So what is it now? How do people get involved in Unschool Adventures?
It's essentially a trip leading company, and you might be giving me more credit than I'm due, because it has been an excuse for me to take teenagers to places that I am personally enthusiastic about visiting.
Yeah.
And I think that is a win-win situation, because the enthusiasm of the trip leaders, I'm not always one of the trip leaders, combines with the enthusiasm of the teenagers and has always created a magical experience. But to be honest, I'm sort of at the end of that point, of that career track for myself. I'm looking for other opportunities right now, Pete.
Well, let's jump into that. What are those opportunities? What are you looking for? We'll get to the book in a minute, because I'm dying. But yeah, I just want to what are those other opportunities that you're looking for?
It's a great question. Whenever you're running travel programs or gap year programs, you are necessarily working with pretty small groups of kids who have the special opportunity to participate in those programs. And so you can have a pretty large impact on a small number of people. And I am more interested in this point on having an impact on more people.
Yeah, yeah.
So the books do fall into that category. The podcasting that I've been doing falls into that category. Mm-hmm. But I know that there's something else out there. I'm in a sort of exploratory sabbatical mode right now. And I'm opening myself up to possibilities. So if anyone who's watching this or listening to this feels like they really mesh with me, just reach out, please.
That's awesome. That's, I think, like with us and what we're doing, we do want to make a greater impact, and it's growing and growing and growing. We just talked before the podcast about some people that we know who are in kind of this unschooling arena. And you've written a book, so let's jump into that. And it's very intriguing. Now, you know, I'm a high school teacher. There are a lot of things in the system that I'm trying to change. I've watched some of the homeschooling pieces and the unschooling and different things like that. Tell us about the book. Why are you still sending your kids to school? And what was the premise behind that? And what is the big message that you want to get out there?
I'll start with the last question.
Yeah.
The big message is, if your kid is seriously struggling in school, and I'm not talking about academically struggling, I'm thinking of this from more of a mental health perspective, or as I write in the first chapter, from the perspective of engagement, boredom, and stress. And if your kid is consistently not engaged, if they are highly bored, and if they are experiencing toxic varieties of stress, not the normal stress that comes from like choosing to do something that feels kind of ambitious, but the stress of having homework piled on top of you month after month, year after year, having all these negative labels attached to you because you don't perform well in the game of school. If that is the situation that your kid is in today, at least in the United States, it's definitely different in other countries, at least in the United States, you can help your kid leave school and take one of many different alternative paths. Some are very familiar, like, for example, a Montessori or a Waldorf school. That is like alternative school light in my book. Or you can go way down the rabbit hole and you can do something that looks a lot more like pure unschooling, or sending your kid to one of these radical alternative schools where there's no curriculum whatsoever. No one is pushing or prodding a kid to do anything aside from, essentially be nice and not hurt other people. And your kid can take any one of these alternative paths and they will turn out just fine, or at least as fine as they would have if they stayed in conventional school. And so the book is essentially an argument on many different fronts for why that's true, because most people simply don't believe that's true. They think if your kid doesn't go to conventional school, if they don't get a high school degree, they won't be able to go to college, they won't be able to get a decent job, they're going to end up living in their parents' basement forever and ever, wiping flaming hot Cheeto dust off their T-shirts when they're age 37.
Right. Where do you think that narrative came from? Because that is an interesting narrative, and I work with a lot of students as well. And when you talk to these students, a lot of the parents give them that kind of fear, like, you have to get this, and if you don't, you will be that Cheeto-eating bum in my basement. What do you think that narrative comes from, and how do you think we can better combat that narrative? Because we know, obviously, you with your studies, it's not all true. As a matter of fact, there's probably little truth to that.
Yeah, the path that I've taken in combating that fear is by showing all of the little small-scale alternatives, which are usually private alternatives because they would never get funded by the public system, that have existed for decades now. So one of those alternatives is homeschooling. And homeschooling has been legal in all 50 states since 1993. And back in the 70s, there was only maybe 10 or 20,000 homeschoolers in the United States. Now there's somewhere closer to 2 or 2.5 million homeschoolers. It is a very significant movement. And as I document in the book, it's not just hyper-religious families who are trying to shelter their kids from all the evil influences of the world. It's an increasingly diverse and powerful movement, and homeschoolers get into all sorts of colleges. They are no longer instantly, shunned because they don't have traditional credentials. So that's one of the things that I highlight. And there's all these different varieties of homeschooling too. Unschooling is a variety of homeschooling. World schooling is a variety of homeschooling. But there's also all these cool little alternative schools, and even things that aren't technically schools. They're like self-directed learning centers. And that's what I was mentioning when I said these places where nobody will force your kid to do anything. And in my mind, these are places that are very unique because they're attempting to do something that's very challenging. And that is to build up a kid's sense of intrinsic motivation through almost extreme measures. By removing all of the controls and expectations so that a kid sits there and has to think at some point, what do I actually want to do? They have to struggle with boredom. They have to struggle with frustration. And no one is coming there to rescue them. And so it's kind of this extreme way to develop a heightened sense of personal responsibility and self-motivation. It's not for everyone, for sure.
Right, right. Well, right now, so we are in the midst of this pandemic, right? And obviously, as an educator, wow, things that I've studied and things that I've worked with a lot of different people, it's a little bit easier to let that control go. But right now, I feel like a lot of people are in that realm where they are going to have to fight the boredom. And I don't want to like discount or discredit anybody who has very difficult situations. There's, monetary loss and different things like that. However, what do you think is going to happen? There's been a lot of talk about people seeking out more and more of these alternative programs post-COVID-19. What are your thoughts on that? And what have you seen or studied in the past that is kind of parallel to that? Or is there something?
We're in a very unique situation, and it's a really crappy situation for pretty much everyone. Because even homeschoolers who were already homeschooling before this happened, they're no longer able to homeschool in the way that they're used to. Homeschooling involves typically a lot of activities outside of the home, going to museums, libraries, field trips. If there's older kids, they're perhaps doing internships or have part-time jobs, or they're taking community college classes. All of that is shut down. And so it's essentially a miserable time for everyone.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are saying there's this giant experiment in homeschooling happening. No, there's a giant experiment in remote schooling happening.
Yeah.
And I think I think a lot of people will actually be really happy to go back to the way things were before. And what we've seen is that this pandemic may actually be way more disturbing to the lifestyles of adults than it is to the lifestyles of kids. The fact that now families have to deal with childcare because their kids are at home, I think is actually a much more upsetting factor than, let me say this a different way. I don't think anyone is seriously concerned that because all of the kids in the US or anywhere else in the world are not going to school for 3 months, that they are going to fall dangerously behind in their ability to become functional adults in this world. It's like, no one actually thinks that's going to happen.
Right.
This is not going to be a damaged cohort of American youth. So school is not really about learning.
Yeah.
That's what we're learning here. School is largely a child care facility, and not trying to belittle anyone who works in schools, because there are adults who form really important one-on-one relationships with kids in schools. Schools provide incredibly important social welfare services. Often it's the only place a kid can go to feel like really safe and secure and get a warm meal. And so there's all these reasons that schools and public schools are important, and they serve a valuable societal function. But that can be true while also saying schools are not really about learning.
Right.
Learning sometimes happens there, but more by and large, schools are about credentialing. They're about sorting kids into different labels, different buckets, and it's for the benefit of future employers. There's a great book that I lean on pretty heavily in my new book, but this book is called The Case Against Education. It was written by an economics professor in 2018, and this guy did like a deep dive into why people get paid more when they have more credentials and better credentials. And he is essentially explaining the signaling function of schools. A school credential, whether we're talking about a high school diploma or a college degree, signals a certain set of personality traits. That you are fairly conformist, you're conscientious, like you'll do your work when you're assigned your work, and you're an agreeable person. It essentially says, like, this is a nice team player right here. And so that's important for the economy to function, but no one actually thinks that super valuable things are learned in schools anymore. Reading, writing, arithmetic, maybe. That's something we can all agree upon. But most important job training happens on the job, or it's self-taught, it's self-directed. So why don't we just cut out all the BS in the middle and just go straight into the important stuff, the self-directed learning, the real-world learning opportunities. That's what I've been about. That's where my heart has been, and that's the kind of stuff that I champion.
This is the disrupt education question. So if someone had to be economics, where they lived, parents, whatever, in a school system, two things. What would, if you could change one thing immediately in the school systems, because we know it's a kind of a big, iceberg that floats around and it doesn't change often, but one thing you could change, what would that be? And secondly, my second question is going to be, if you know somebody at the secondary level, 9 through 12th grade, okay, and I use grades because that's part of that signaling, what kind of advice would you give that student? So those are two big questions. I'm going to lay them on you. What do you think?
I could definitely answer the first one. If I had a magic wand, I would make all classes optional.
Nice.
There's many ways that could be implemented. You could still have unit requirements. You could still have kind of broad subject level requirements, like if you're doing a liberal arts degree in college, but make every class optional. That's it. That would change so much. And for your second question, what advice would I give to a high school student? I'd say you should start developing a life outside of school right now. Because I think there's nothing, there are a few things more sad than seeing a student or a young person whose only validation in life comes from being a successful student. Because school is going to end at some point. You need to have a sense of self-worth and validation that comes from having personal interests, hobbies, relationships. And you have to start now. It will simply not happen. This is what I've seen working with teenage unschoolers who are given large amounts of freedom by their parents to be self-directed, starting at very early ages, or possibly kids who are in school, and then they choose to drop out of school and become unschoolers. In my experience, these young people are essentially starting the life challenges that the average 22-year-old starts when they leave college, which is, what do I do when there's not a strong preset structure telling me what to do, giving me goals and feedback? How do I create meaning for myself? How do I find work that challenges me? How do I, how do I build a life, essentially? Being a self-directed learner, going to one of these crazy alternative schools, or being an unschooler, I think fundamentally is about that. You're starting to build your life earlier than everyone else, and that can be extremely challenging. It's not an easy thing. This is why I would never say everyone should homeschool or everyone should go to any certain type of alternative school, because what we really need is not one monolithic solution. We need a huge diversity of solutions, many of them small and local.
Right.
And that's the only path forward I see to any sort of broad-based education reform.
Have you found that there's an optimal age, or is it just different for everybody? Because to start to get to that point, because when you said 22, the first thing, Blake, I did right out of college is I went to bartending school. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I have this degree, I have all these credentials, and I did that. So that's why I kind of chuckled when you said that, because I went right back into my own history. Have you found an optimal level, or is it just kind of flowing with who the student is individually when they start to, able to handle those challenges?
Well, the first thing I did at age 22, coming out of college, was go sign up for an emergency medical technician course. I was hungry to do something real, something that was physical, and so that was my version of bartending. Good question. How old do you need to be to really be able to take the reins of your own education? I've seen it happen with a handful of 12 and 13-year-olds, but I think far more often we're looking at ages 16, 17, 18, and sometimes much later. I've known a number of unschoolers who are just growing up more slowly than everyone else, and a lot of the stress and anxiety that they felt was from the school system and also the larger culture pressuring them to meet these very arbitrary milestones, to be interested in all this academic stuff all the way up until age 18. The pressure to move out and start college. And as we live in a generally wealthy country where we don't actually have to kick our kids out of the house at age 18, I think a lot of young people see through the ruse. They see through these very arbitrary numbers, and they say, why can't I take a few extra years to figure this stuff out? And often that's exactly what they need.
Yeah.
While other kids, they figured it out early. They're age 16, they're ready to sign up for community college classes, they're done with the BS and the bureaucracy and the wasted time of conventional school, whether it's a public or a private school.
Mm-hmm.
And I've worked with a lot of those kids too. And so it's this idea of a singular kind of stage theory of development that every kid goes through, that we have affixed that idea to our school system.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the thing that must be broken and crumbled and swept into the dustbin of history, because kids learn at all different paces for all different reasons, and we have not yet figured out a system that accommodates that.
Is there anything close? Is there a system close out there? Like I'm sure you've done a lot of research. Everybody looks at Finland. Everybody looks at, okay, blah, 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 that school system. Yeah, I'm just wondering.
A school teacher from Finland
Yeah.
who said, yes, all of our schools are really great and they're well-resourced, but there's one big problem. They're all exactly the same.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
There is no diversity in our schools.
Mm-hmm.
Every school, no matter where you go in the country,
Mm-hmm.
operates the same way. And again, it seems the Finnish have figured out a really great, really humane model for doing conventional school.
Right.
But she said there are still plenty of kids who don't fit into that model.
Yeah.
And so, again, I think this notion of one system, one solution, that's the problem right there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so easy and attractive to want to believe in that. From a policy perspective, from just, this is how society operates, so I can communicate this to my kids
Mm-hmm.
perspective. No, there needs to be a messy diversity
Yeah.
of solutions that are constantly rising and falling, being created and destroyed.
That sounds like learning. I mean, that what you just described, right? It's not education, it's learning. That's
In the same way that we're led to believe that there's one life path for ourselves. We just need to discover what we're passionate about,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'll pursue it doggedly until the day we retire. We've already seen how that is not reality for 98% of humans on this planet.
Blake, tell us where people can find your book, find you, all your connection. Where can people find you and connect with you?
One place to go, and that's just blakeboles.com, BLAKEBOLES.com. And I've got my podcast there, which is Off Trail Learning, and all the books and the Unschool Adventure stuff, and whatever else I figure out that I might be doing in the upcoming years. And so I encourage listeners to visit, and I've got a monthly newsletter where you can sign up.
Awesome. Well, I will be signing up. Took a look at the book just briefly. Amazing stuff. I can't wait to dig in. Ladies and gentlemen, if you need to just go deep into a guy who basically made his own path into learning about all the different disruptions of education, Blake, you're the guy, man. I appreciate you, and thank you for hanging out with us on Disrupt Education today.
I appreciate you, Pete, and thank you for hosting this podcast.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, till next time, keep disrupting.